Hi, and welcome to Voices from the Left. I'm your host, Craig. Thanks for listening. This is the audio recording of a live stream I did on Twitch talking about French colonialism in Haiti. The live stream is called Hammered Sickle, and I imbibe and talk about leftist content. Reminder that this information is from Wikipedia, so take it for what it's worth. All the links will be in the show notes. Please forgive my terrible pronunciation of French names and the choppy audio that pops up here and there from the laggy stream.
The French colonial empire comprised the overseas colonies, protectorates, and mandate territories that came under French rule from the 16th century onward. A distinction is generally made between the first French colonial empire that existed until 1814, by which time most of it had been lost or sold, and the second French colonial empire, which began with the conquest of Algiers in 1830. Anyone that happened to catch my second stream, which would have been part one of French colonialism, we talked about the second French colonial empire, in particular what they did in North Africa, and with the country of Burkina Faso. But that happened after 1830, so in this case we're talking about what happened before that, in particular Haiti. So let's see. France began to establish colonies in North America, the Caribbean, and India in the 17th century, but lost most of its possessions following its defeat in the 7 Years' War. The North American possessions were lost to Britain and Spain, but Spain later returned Louisiana to France in 1800. The territory was then sold to the United States in 1803. France built a new empire mostly after 1850, concentrating chiefly in Africa as well as Indochina and the South Pacific, which, as I just mentioned, we already talked about what they did in Africa. All right, so the first French colonial empire was from the 16th century to 1814. During the 16th century, During the 16th century, the French colonization of the Americas began. Excursions of Giovanni da Verrazzano and Jacques Cartier in the early 16th century, as well as the frequent voyages of French boats and fishermen to the Grand Banks off Newfoundland throughout that century, were the precursors to the story of France's colonial expansion. But Spain's defense of its American monopoly and the further distractions caused in France itself in the later 16th century by the French Wars of Religion prevented any constant efforts by France to settle colonies. Early French attempts to found colonies in Brazil in 1555, Florida in 1562, and in 1612 at São Luís were not successful due to lack of official interest and to Portuguese and Spanish vigilance. The story of France's colonial empire really begins in July of 1605 with the foundation of Port Royal in the colony of Acadia in North America, in what is now Nova Scotia, Canada. A few years later, in 1608, Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec, which was to become the capital of the enormous but sparsely settled fur trading colony of New France, also known as Canada. As the French Empire in North America grew, the French also began to build a smaller but more profitable empire in the West Indies. Settlement along the South American coast in what is today French Guiana began in 1624, and a colony was founded on St. Kitts in 1625. The current Isle of the Commonwealth of Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean also fell under increasing French settlement from the early 1630s. The Compagnie des Îles de l'Amérique founded colonies in Guadeloupe and Martinique in 1635, and a colony was later founded in St. Lucia by 1650. The food-producing plantations of these colonies were built and sustained through slavery, with the supply of slaves dependent on the African slave trade. Local resistance by the indigenous peoples resulted in the Carib explosion of 1660. before we move on, we're going to chat a little bit about the West Indies. The West Indies is a sub-region of North Africa surrounded by the North Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, which compromises 13 independent island countries and 19 dependencies in 3 archipelagos, the Greater Antilles, the Lesser Antilles, and the Lucian Archipelago. The sub-region includes all the islands in the Antilles plus the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos Islands, which are in the North Atlantic. Nowadays, the term West Indies is often interchangeable with the term Caribbean, although the latter may also include some Central and South American mainland nations which have Caribbean coastlines or coastlines close to the Caribbean, such as Belize, French Guiana, and Suriname, as well as the Atlantic island nation of Bermuda, all of which are geographically distinct from the 3 main island groups, but culturally related. And as far as the West Indies in particular go, they were named that way by, of course, Christopher Columbus, who was the first documented European to set foot in that part of the world. Okay. So I mentioned the Carib expulsion earlier, so we'll talk about that. So the Carib expulsion from Martinique was the French-led ethnic cleansing that removed most of the Carib population in 1660 from the island of Martinique. This followed the French invasion in 1635 and its conquest of the Caribbean island that made it part of the French West Indies. The Carib people had migrated from the mainland to the islands about 1200 AD, according to carbon dating of artifacts. In 1635, the Carib were overwhelmed by French forces led by the adventurer Pierre Belin des Nambucq, I'm going to butcher that name, and his nephew Jacques Diel du Parquet, who imposed French colonial rule on the indigenous Carib peoples. Cardinal Richelieu of France gave the island to the Saint Christophe Company, in which he was a shareholder. Later, the company was reorganized as the Company of the American Islands. The French colonists imposed French law on the conquered inhabitants, and Jesuit missionaries arrived to convert them to, of course, the Roman Catholic Church, because we couldn't have colonization without good old Christianity. Yeah. Alright, so continuing. Because the Carib people resisted working as laborers to build and maintain the sugar and cocoa plantations with the French, began to develop in the Caribbean. In 1636, King Louis XIII proclaimed La Traite des Noirs. This authorized the capture or purchase of slaves from Africa, who were then transported as labor to Martinique and other parts of the French West Indies. In 1650, the company liquidated and sold Martinique to Jacques Diel du Parquet, who became governor until his death in 1658. His widow then took control of the island for France. As more French colonists arrived, they were attracted to the fertile area known as Gabastère, or leeward side. The French had pushed the remaining Carib people to this northeastern coast and the Caravel Peninsula, but the colonists wanted the additional land, of course, because that's what colonists do. The Jesuits and Dominicans agreed that whichever order arrived there first would get all future parishes in that part of the island. The Jesuits came by sea and the Dominicans by land, with the Dominicans ultimately prevailing. When the Carib revolted against French rule in 1660, the governor Charles Huillier de Petit-Pré, I'm sure I said that wrong, but whatever, he's a French colonizer, retaliated with war against them. Many were killed. Those who survived were taken captive and expelled from the island. On Martinique, the French colonists signed a peace treaty with the few remaining Carib. Some Carib had fled to Dominica or St. Vincent, where the French agreed to leave them at peace. However, following the British conquest of these islands, the Carib would eventually be expelled to Central America after losing the Second Carib War. France's most important Caribbean colonial possession was established in 1664 when the colony of Saint-Domingue, which is today known as Haiti, was founded on the western half of the Spanish island of Hispaniola. In the 18th century, Saint-Domingue grew to be the richest sugar colony in the Caribbean. The eastern half of Hispaniola, which is today's Dominican Republic, also came under French rule for a short period after being given to France by Spain in 1795. So now we're going to get into the Haitian Revolution and what ultimately ended up causing the island of Haiti to have to pay basically tribute, although it was, a whole bunch of stuff going on, but they basically had to pay France money for well over 100 years. We'll get into that, but we'll talk about the Haitian Revolution now. So true disaster came to what remained of France's colonial empire in 1791, when Saint-Domingue, which was France's richest and most important colony, was riven by a massive slave revolt, caused partly by the divisions among the island's elite, which had resulted from the French Revolution of 1789. The slaves, led eventually by Toussaint Louverture, and then, following his capture by the French in 1801, by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, probably Dessalines. It's French. Should remember my high school French class. I hated that class. Anyway, held their own against French and British opponents. The French launched a failed expedition in 1802 and were up against a crippling Royal Naval blockade, which of course, that's Britain, the following year. As a result, the Empire of Haiti ultimately achieved independence in 1804, becoming the first black republic in the world, followed by Liberia in 1847. The black and mixed-race population of the island had declined from 700,000 in 1789 to 351,000 in 1804. About 80,000 Haitians died in the 1802 to 1803 campaign alone. Of the 55,000 French soldiers that were dispatched to Haiti in 1802, 45,000, including 18 generals, died, along with 10,000 sailors, the great majority from disease. And I think that would have been yellow fever, was the majority of that, but I'm sure there was other things. Captain Sorrell of the British Navy observed that France lost there one of the finest armies she ever sent forth, composed of picked veterans, the conquerors of Italy and of German legions. She is now entirely deprived of her influence and her power in the West Indies. Yeah, tough shit. Meanwhile, France's newly resumed war with Britain resulted in the British capture of practically all remaining French colonies. These were restored at the Treaty of Amiens in 1802, but when war resumed in 1803, the British soon recaptured them, because, British are the OG colonialists. So they're gonna colonize, because that's what they do. France's 1800 recovery of Louisiana from Spain in the secret Third Treaty of San Ildefonso came to nothing, as the success of the Haitian Revolution convinced Napoleon that holding Louisiana would not be worth the cost, leading to its sale to the United States in 1803. So now I'll get a little bit more in depth about the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution. It was a successful insurrection by self-liberated slaves against French colonial rule in Saint-Domingue, now the sovereign state of Haiti. The revolt began in August of 1791 and ended in 1804 with the former colony's independence. It involved black, biracial, French, Spanish, British, and Polish participants, with the ex-slave Toussaint Louverture emerging as Haiti's most prominent general. The revolution was the only slave uprising that led to the founding of a state which was both free from slavery, though not forced labor, and ruled by non-whites and former captives. The successful revolution was a defining moment in history of the Atlantic world, and the revolution's effects on the institution of slavery were felt throughout the Americas. The end of French rule and the abolition of slavery in the former colony was followed by a successful defense of the freedoms the former slaves had won, and with the collaboration of already free people of color, of their independence from white Europeans. So much of the Caribbean economic development in the 18th century was contingent on Europeans' demand for sugar. Plantation owners produced sugar as a commodity crop from cultivation of sugarcane, which required extensive labor. The colony of Santo Domingo also had extensive coffee, coca, and indigo plantations, but these were smaller and less profitable than sugar. The commodity crops were traded for European goods. Starting in the 1730s, French engineers constructed complex irrigation systems to increase sugarcane production. By the 1740s, Santo Domingo, together with the British colony of Jamaica, had become the main suppliers of the world's sugar. Production of sugar depended on extensive manual labor provided by enslaved Africans. An average of 600 ships engaged every year in shipping products from Saint Domingo to Bordeaux, and the value of the colony's crops and goods was almost equal in value to all of the products shipped from the 13 colonies to Great Britain. I'm going to read that again. An average of 600 ships engaged every year in shipping products from Saint Domingo to Bordeaux, and the value of the colony's crops and goods was nearly equal in value to all of the products shipped from the 13 colonies, which of course is what became America, to Great Britain. The livelihood of 1 million of the approximate 25 million people who lived in France in 1789 depended directly upon the agricultural imports from Santo Domingo, and several million indirectly depended upon trade from the colony to maintain their standard of living. Saint Domingo was the most profitable French colony in the world, indeed one of the most profitable of all the European settler colonial areas in the 18th century. Slavery sustained sugar production under harsh conditions. Diseases such as malaria, which was brought from Africa, and yellow fever caused high mortality, thriving in the tropical Caribbean climate. In 1787 alone, the French imported 20,000 slaves from Africa into Saint Domingo, while the British imported 38,000 slaves total to all of their Caribbean colonies. The death rate from yellow fever was such that at least 50% of the slaves from Africa died within a year of arriving. Man. So while the white planters preferred to work their slaves as hard as possible, providing them only the bare minimum of food and shelter, they calculated that it was better to get the most work out of their slaves with the lowest expense possible. Well, of course, that's capitalism. Since they were probably going to die of yellow fever anyway. The death rate was so high that polyandry, one woman being married to several men at the same time, developed as a common form of marriage among the slaves. As slaves had no legal rights, content warning here. As slaves had no legal rights, there was rape by planters. Their unmarried sons or overseers was a common occurrence on the plantation. Make sure to take self-care for anybody listening. This is some awful stuff, but it's important. Okay. So the planters and their families, together with the petty bourgeoisie of merchants and shopkeepers, were outnumbered by slaves by a factor of more than 10 to 1 on Santo Domingo. The largest sugar plantations and concentrations of slaves were in the north of the islands, and whites lived in fear of slave rebellion. Even by the standards of the Caribbean, French slave masters were extremely cruel in their treatment of the slaves. Good Lord. They used the threat and acts of physical violence to maintain control and suppress efforts of rebellion. When slaves left the plantations or disobeyed their masters, they were subject to whipping or to more extreme torture such as castration or burning, the punishment being both a personal lesson and a warning for other slaves. Oh man, some heavy shit. Just remember, like I said, take some self-care because this is some awful stuff. King Louis XIV of France passed the Code Noir in 1685 in an attempt to regulate such violence in the treatment of slaves in general in the colony, but masters openly and consistently broke the code. During the 18th century, local legislation reversed parts of it. In 1758, the planters began passing legislation restricting the rights of other groups of people until a rigid caste system was defined. Most historians classify the people of the era into three groups. The first group were white colonists, or les blancs. This group was generally subdivided into the plantation owners and a lower class of whites who often served as overseers or day laborers, as well as artisans and shopkeepers, otherwise known as the petty bourgeoisie. The second group were free people of color, who were usually mixed race, being of both African and French descent. They tended to be educated and literate, and the men often served in the army or as administrators on plantations. Many were children of white planters and enslaved mothers, or free women of color. Others had purchased their freedom from their owners through the sale of their own produce or artistic works. They often received education or artisan training, and sometimes inherited freedom or property from their fathers. Some owned and operated their own plantations and became slave owners. The third group, outnumbering the others by a ratio of 10 to 1, was made up of mostly African-born slaves. A high rate of mortality among them meant that planters continually had to import new slaves. So you remember earlier, they expected like half of the 10,000 to die in the first year of yellow fever, pretty much, was the main cause, it sounded like. So, yeah, that's a hell of a high mortality rate. This kept their culture more African and separate from other people on the island. Many plantations had large concentrations of slaves from a particular region of Africa, and it was therefore somewhat easier for these groups to maintain elements of their culture, religion, and language. This also separated new slaves from Africa from Creoles, which were slaves born in the colony, who already had kin networks and often had more prestigious roles on plantations and more opportunities for emancipation. Most slaves spoke a patois of the French language known as Haitian Creole, which was also used by island-born mixed-race people and whites for communication with the workers. The majority of the slaves were Yoruba, from what is now modern Nigeria, Fan, from what is now Benin, and Congo, from the Kingdom of Congo and what is now modern northern Angola and the western Congo. Congolese, at 40%, were the largest of the African ethnic groups represented amongst the slaves. The slaves developed their own religion, a syncretic mixture of Catholicism and Western African religions known as Voodoo. This belief system implicitly rejected the Africans' status as slaves. Moving on to the rebellion. So, 1791 slave rebellion, and in particular the onset of the revolution. Alright, Guillaume Raynal attacked slavery in the 1780 edition of his History of European Colonization. He also predicted a general slave revolt in the colonies, saying that there were signs of, quote, the impending storm, unquote. One such sign was the action of the French revolutionary government to grant citizenship to wealthy free people of color in May 1791. Since white planters refused to comply with this decision, within 2 months, isolated fighting broke out between the former slaves and the whites. This added to the tense climate. Raynal's prediction came true in August of 1791 when the slaves of Saint Domingue rose in revolt. Thousands of slaves attended a secret voodoo ceremony as a tropical storm came in. The lightning and the thunder were taken as auspicious omens, and later that night the slaves began to kill their masters and plunge the colony into civil war. The signal to begin the revolt had been given by Duddy Boukman, a high priest of voodoo and leader of the maroon slaves, and Cecile Fatiman during a religious ceremony at Bois Caiman on the night of August 14th. Within the next 10 days, slaves had taken control of the entire northern province in an unprecedented revolt. In the south, beginning in September, 13,000 slaves and rebels led by Romain la Prophetesse, based in choppy, that's the town or part of it, Troucoffy, and there's a space in between. They took supplies from and burned plantations, freed slaves, and occupied the area's two major cities, Léogâne and Jacmel. By 1792, slave rebels controlled a third of Saint Domingue. The success of the rebellion caused the National Assembly to realize it was facing an ominous situation. The Assembly granted civil and political rights to free men of color in the colonies in March 1792. Countries throughout Europe, as well as the United States, were shocked by the decision, but the Assembly was determined to stop the revolt. Apart from granting rights to free people of color, the Assembly dispatched 16,000 French soldiers to the island. A new governor sent by Paris, by the name of Léger Félicité Sonthanax, Sonthanax, guess as good as mine. But the new governor abolished slavery in the northern province and had hostile relations with the planters, whom he saw as royalists. The same month, a coalition of whites and conservative free blacks and forces under French Commissaire National Edmond de Saint-Léger put down the Troucoffy uprising in the south, after André Rigaud, then based near Port-au-Prince, declined to ally with them. Meanwhile, in 1793, France declared war on Great Britain. The Grand Blancs in Saint Domingue. The Grand Blancs were basically the white plantation owners. In Saint Domingue, unhappy with Sonthanax, arranged with Britain to declare British sovereignty over the colony, believing that the British would maintain slavery. The British Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger, believed that the success of the slave revolt in Saint Domingue would inspire insurrections in the British Caribbean colonies. He further thought that taking Saint Domingue, the richest of the French colonies, would be a useful bargaining chip in eventual peace negotiations with France, and in the interim, occupying Saint Domingue would mean diverting its great wealth to the British Treasury. Henry Dundas, 1st Viscount Melville, who was Pitt's Secretary of State for War, instructed Sir Adam Williamson, the Lieutenant Governor of the colony of Jamaica, to sign an agreement with representatives of the French colonists that promised to restore the Ancien Regime, slavery and discrimination against mixed-race colonists, a move that drew criticism from abolitionists William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson. The American journalist James Perry notes that the great irony of the British campaign in Saint Domingue was that it ended as a complete debacle, costing the British Treasury millions of pounds and the British military thousands upon thousands of dead, all for nothing. Spain, which controlled the rest of the island of Hispaniola, also joined the conflict and fought with Britain against France. So as we mentioned before, the island of Hispaniola was Haiti and what is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Haiti was owned by France. The Dominican Republic was owned by Spain at the time. The proportion of slaves was not as high in the Spanish portion of the island. Spanish forces invaded Saint Domingue and were joined by the rebels. For most of the conflict, the British and Spanish supplied the rebels with food, ammunition, arms, medicine, naval support, and military advisors. By August 1793, there were only 3,500 French soldiers on the island. In September of 1793, about 600 British soldiers from Jamaica landed at Jérémie to be greeted with shouts of "Vivent les Anglais" from the French population. 2 days later, in 1793, Mole St. Nicholas, the main French naval base in Saint Domingue, surrendered to the Royal Navy peacefully. Of course, the Royal Navy is British. However, everywhere the British went, they restored slavery, which made them hated by the mass of the common people. The Spanish were eventually expelled in 1794, leaving the British, the French, and their slave populations to fight each other over the island and by the end of 1798 the British withdrew. The island then became ruled by Toussaint Louverture, although a self-educated former domestic slave was one of the most successful black commanders. Like Jean-Francois and Biassou, I'm not sure how to say that, Biassou, he initially fought for the Spanish crown. This is Toussaint Louverture. After the British had invaded Saint Domingue, Louverture decided to fight for the French if they would agree to free all the slaves. So, initially, Toussaint Louverture, who was a self-educated former domestic slave, he initially fought for the Spanish. But after the British invaded, decided to change sides and fight for the French if they would agree to free all the slaves. Sonthonax, who I mentioned earlier, he claimed an end to slavery in August of 1792. Louverture worked with a French general by the name of Etienne Lavaux to ensure that all slaves would be freed. Louverture abandoned the Spanish army and brought his forces over to the French in May of 1794 after the Spanish refused to take steps to end slavery. Under the military leadership of Toussaint, the former slaves succeeded in winning concessions from the British and expelled the Spanish forces. In the end, Toussaint essentially restored control of Saint Domingue to France. Louverture was organized and articulate. Having made himself master of the island, however, Toussaint did not wish to surrender too much power to France. He began to rule the country as an effectively autonomous entity. Louverture overcame a succession of local rivals, including Sonthonax, the Frenchman, who gained support from many Haitians, which angered Louverture. André Rigaud, a free man of color who fought to keep control of the South in the War of Knives, and Comte Eduvel. Oh my goodness, I'm butchering that. Anyway, this guy, Comte Devoudel, forced a fatal wedge between Rigaud and Louverture before escaping to France. Toussaint defeated a British expeditionary force in 1798. In addition, he led an invasion of neighboring Santo Domingo and freed the slaves there on the 3rd of January, 1801. I hadn't planned on talking about the War of Knives, but now I'm sitting here, now I'm intrigued, so I'm going to go talk about that for a minute. We'll get back to Toussaint Louverture. The War of Knives, also known as the War of the South, was a civil war from 1799 to July 1800 between the Haitian revolutionary Toussaint Louverture, a black ex-slave who controlled the north of Saint Domingue, of course modern-day Haiti, and his adversary André Rigaud, a mixed person of color who controlled the south. Louverture and Rigaud fought over de facto control of the French colony of Santo Domingo during the war. Their conflict followed the withdrawal of British forces from the colony earlier during the Haitian Revolution. The war resulted in Toussaint taking control of the entirety of Santo Domingo and Rigaud fleeing into exile. Okay, so I'll leave the overview of the War of Knives. I may come back to that, but I'm going to finish this about Toussaint Louverture. Okay, so as I said, Toussaint Louverture defeated a British expedition in 1798. In addition, he led an invasion of neighboring Santo Domingo and freed the slaves in January of 1801. In 1801, Louverture issued a constitution for Saint Domingue that decreed he would be governor for life and called for black autonomy and a sovereign black state. In response, Napoleon Bonaparte dispatched a large expeditionary force of French soldiers and warships to the island, led by Bonaparte's brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc. They were under secret instructions to restore slavery, at least in the formerly Spanish-held part of the island. If you remember, the formerly Spanish-held part was what is now the Dominican Republic. Bonaparte ordered that Toussaint was to be treated with respect until the French forces were established. Leclerc was to wage, quote, a war to the death, unquote, with no mercy, and all of Toussaint's followers to be shot when captured. Once that was completed, slavery would be ultimately restored. The new mergers were accompanied by mixed-race troops led by Alexandre Pétion and André Rigaud, who had been defeated by Toussaint 3 years earlier. The French arrived in February of 1802 at Le Cap with the Haitian commander Henri Christophe being ordered by Leclerc to turn over the city to the French. This is after Napoleon ordered the invasion of Haiti. When Christophe refused, the French assaulted Le Cap and the Haitians set afire rather than surrender it. Leclerc sent Toussaint letters promising him, "Have no worries about your personal fortune. It will be safeguarded for you, since it had only too well earned by your own efforts. Do not worry about the of your fellow citizens." Unquote. When Toussaint still failed to appear at Le Cap, Leclerc issued a proclamation on February 17, 1802. Quote, "General Toussaint and General Christophe are outlawed. All citizens are ordered to hunt down and treat them as rebels against the French Republic." Captain Marcus Rainsford, a British Army officer who visited Saint Domingue, observed the training of the Haitian army, writing, quote, "At a whistle, a whole brigade ran 300 or 400 yards, and then, separating, threw themselves flat on the ground, changing their backs and sides, keeping up a strong fire until recalled. This movement is executed with such facility and precision as totally to prevent cavalry from charging them in bushy and hilly country." The French oppression of Haiti continued until they were finally defeated by the end of 1803. This is in January of 1804. So, Dessalines declared the former colony's independence, renaming it Haiti, and he lasted from 1804 to 1806 as the leader. Several changes began to take place in Haiti. The independence of Haiti was a major blow to France and its colonial empire, but the French state would take several decades to recognize the loss of the colony. As the French retreated, Haiti, which had once been called the, quote, "Pearl of the Antilles," unquote, the richest French colony in the world, was impoverished, as its economy was in ruins after the Revolution. Haiti struggled to recover economically from the war. The Haitians had paid a high price for their freedom, losing about 200,000 dead between 1791 and 1803. And the majority of the European dead who were killed by yellow fever, the majority of the Haitian dead were the victims of violence, of course. Okay. Now we'll move on to the part that I wanted to hit on, but initially, which was the goal of the stream, but I wanted to give all the context ahead of time. So we're going to talk about the independence debt, quote unquote. The nascent state's future was hobbled in 1825 when France, under Charles X, forced it, with French warships anchored off the coast during negotiations, to pay 150 million gold francs in reparations to French ex-slaveholders as a condition of French political recognition and to end the newly formed state's political and economic isolation. April 17, 1825, the King of France renounced his rights of sovereignty over Santo Domingo and recognized the independence of Haiti. President Jean-Pierre Boyer believed that the constant threat of a French invasion was stymieing the Haitian economy and thus felt the need to settle the matter once and for all. Though the amount of reparations was reduced to 90 million francs in 1838, Haiti was unable to finish paying off its debt until 1947. The indemnity, of course, bankrupted the Haitian treasury and left the country's government deeply impoverished, causing long-term instability. Haiti was therefore forced to take out a loan from French banks, who provided the funds for the large first installment, severely affecting Haiti's ability to prosper. The first annual payment alone was 6 times Haiti's annual revenue at the time. The payment was later reduced to 90 million francs in 1838, which is an equivalent to $32,535,940,803 in 2022. with Haiti paying about 112 million francs in total. Over the 122 years between 1825 and 1947, the debt severely hampered Haitian economic development as parts of interest and down payments totaled a significant share of Haitian gross domestic product, constraining the use of domestic financial funds for infrastructure and public services. France's demand of payments in exchange for recognizing Haiti's independence was delivered to the country by several French warships in 1825, 21 years after Haiti's declaration of independence in 1804. Due to the unrealistic demands pushed by France, Haiti was forced to take large loans from French bank Crédit Industriel et Commercial, enriching the bank's shareholders. Though France received its last indemnity payment in 1888, the government of the United States funded the acquisition of Haiti's treasury in 1911 in order to receive interest payments related to the indemnity. In 1922, the rest of Haiti's debt to France was moved to be paid to American investors. I fucking hate capitalism. I fucking hate it. It took until 1947, about 122 years, for Haiti to finally pay off all the associated interest to the National City Bank of New York, which is now known as Citibank. In 2016, the Parliament of France repealed the 1825 Ordinance of Charles X, though no reparations have been offered by France. These debts are denounced as the root of modern Haiti's poverty and a case of odious debt. Debts forced upon a population by abuse of force. As I said, the French made them sign this agreement by force with warships off the coast. In 2022, the New York Times published a dedicated investigative series on the topic, which I didn't look into. The New York Times is, suspect at best. So who knows what they say, but regardless, doesn't defeat the fact that this awful debt had to be paid. Okay, now we'll go down and talk about the payment itself. So the payments were designed by France to be so large that it would effectively create a, quote, double debt, unquote. France would receive a direct annual payment, and Haiti would pay French bankers interest on the loans required to meet France's annual demands. France viewed Haiti's debt as the principal interest in Haiti, the question that dominated everything else for us, unquote, according to a French minister. Excuse me. Much of the debt would be paid directly to the French state-owned Caisse des Dépôts et Consignations. I butchered that. Whatever. Fuck you, France. France ordered Haiti to pay the 150 million francs over a period of 5 years, with the first annual payment of 30 million francs being 6 times larger than Haiti's yearly revenue, which we mentioned, of course, in a little bit earlier, but now we're getting into more about the payment itself. So this required Haiti to take out a loan from the French bank Tourneau Gandolf, AC. Anyway, they had to take out the loan to make the payment. The first 30 million francs required a $24 million franc loan from the Tourneau Gandolf at sea that resulted in high interest, and Haiti's treasury was completely emptied, with the French ship transporting locked shipments of money to Paris. The story of the first payment of 24 million gold francs being transported across Paris from the vaults of Tourneau Gandolf EC to the coffers of the French treasury was recorded in detail. Haiti would continue to acquire loans from France and the United States in order to fulfill payments. Such large payments became impossible for Haiti, and defaults occurred immediately, with Haiti's late payments often raising tensions with France. Tourneau Gandolf at sea seized assets of the Haitian government for failing to pay on its loan, though the Tribunal de la Seine overturned these actions on May of 1828. In February of 1838, France finally agreed to reduce the debt to 90 million francs to be paid over a period of 30 years to compensate former plantation owners who had lost their slaves. The 2004 equivalent of 21 billion, with a B, billion US dollars. By the late 1800s, 80% of Haiti's wealth was being used to pay foreign debt. France was the highest collector, followed by Germany and, of course, the United States. Henri Derieux, head of the French bank Crédit Industriel et Commercial, CIC, was inspired to increase revenue for the bank by following the example of state-run banks acquiring capital from other distant French colonies such as Martinique and Senegal. In 1874 and 1875, Haiti took out two large loans from CIC, greatly increasing the nation's debt. French banks charged Haiti 40% of the loaned funds just for commissions and other fees, and CIC would go on to acquire, quote, much of Haiti's financial future, unquote, according to the New York Times. Thomas Piketty described the loans as an early example of neo-colonialism through debt. From 1880 to 1881, Haiti granted a currency issuance concession to create the National Bank of Haiti, which was headquartered in Paris by CIC and was simultaneously funding the construction of the Eiffel Tower. The National Bank of Haiti was described as an entity of, quote, pure extraction, unquote, by Paris School of Economics economic historian Eric Monet. On the board of the National Bank was Edouard Delasserre, the great-grandson of French slave trader and owner Jean-Joseph Delaborde, who established himself when France controlled Haiti. Haitian Charles La Foresterie, who mainly lived in France and successfully pushed for Haiti to accept the 1875 loan with the CIC, later retired from his positions in Haiti amid corruption allegations, joining the bank's board in Paris after its founding. CIC would go on to take $136 million in 2022 U.S. dollars from Haiti and distribute those funds among shareholders who made 15% annual returns on average, not returning any of the earnings to Haiti. These funds distributed among shareholders would ultimately cost Haiti at least $1.7 billion of development. Billion with a B. Under the French-controlled bank, Haitian funds were overseen by France, and all transitions resulted with a commission fee, with CIC shareholder profits often being larger than the entire budget of Haiti's public works. The French government finally acknowledged the payment of 90 million francs in 1888, and over a period of about 70 years, Haiti paid 112 million francs to France, which is about $560 million in 2022 money. Alright, let's talk about the aftermath. So, according to the New York Times, the payments cost Haiti much of its development potential, removing as much as $115 billion of growth from Haiti, or about 8 times the nation's total economy. Over 2 centuries, according to calculations conducted by 15 prominent economists. The history of Haiti's indemnity is not taught as part of education in France. Well, of course it's not. Aristocratic French families have also forgotten that their families profited from the debt payments of Haiti. Yeah, they forgot. At the time, President of France, François Hollande, would eventually describe the money paid by Haiti to France as, quote, the ransom of independence, unquote. And in 2016, the Parliament of France repealed the 1825 ordinance in a symbolic gesture. In 2003, the president of Haiti was Jean-Bertrand Aristide. He demanded that France pay Haiti 21 billion US dollars. What he said was the equivalent in today's money of the 90 million gold francs Haiti was forced to pay Paris after winning its freedom from France. French and Haitian officials later claimed to the New York Times that Aristide's calls for reparation led to French and Haitian officials collaborating with the United States on removing Aristide because France feared that discussions of reparations would set a precedent for other former colonies such as Algeria. Anyone who has any idea or any inkling of what the United States was up to in the 20th century, I think you know what I'm about to say. In February 2004, a coup d'etat occurred against President Aristide. The United Nations Security Council, of which France is a permanent member, rejected a February 2004 appeal from the Caribbean Community, otherwise known as CARICOM, C-A-R-I-C-O-M, for international peacekeeping forces to be sent into its member state, Haiti. However, the Security Council voted unanimously to send troops into Haiti 3 days later, just hours after Aristide's controversial resignation. The Provisional Prime Minister, Gerard Latortue, who assumed office after the coup, would later rescind the reparations demand, calling it foolish and illegal. Myrtha Desilme, chairperson of the Haiti-Jamaican Exchange Committee, said, quote, "I believe that the call for reparations could have something to do with it, because the French were definitely not happy about it and made some very hostile comments. I believe that he did have grounds for that demand, because that is what started the downfall of Haiti. In the 19 years following the that's unquote, sorry. In the 19 years following the coup d'etat, all of Haiti's government received substantial support from France and the United States, and none of them made a claim for restitution of the independence debt." So, this is part 2 of my streams about French colonialism. The first part, of course, was about what the French did in North Africa after 1832, which started with the invasion of Algeria. I will leave it at that, and I hope you guys enjoyed the stream.
That does it for the show. Thanks for listening. Voices from the Left is a presentation of the Anti-Capitalist Podcast Network. Special thanks to Nick Josephs for the use of the theme song. You can find Nick on Spotify or on the web at nickjosephs.com. Don't forget to rate and review on whichever platform you listen. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe at patreon.com/voicesfromtheleft or donate at buymeacoffee.com/voicesfromtheleft. All the links will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and solidarity.